I will be talking about how mainstream media is still painting Africa as an undeveloped country, specifically Nigeria. Africa is frequently depicted in the media as an underdeveloped nation with no achievements whatsoever. These are belief there are developed nations in Africa. More than often than not, Africa's accomplishments appear to be hidden, disputed, or even appropriated from other continents. Countries like South Africa, though, are the very few African countries the mainstream media is okay with showing its newer developments. I believe the reason why media is okay with portraying it's because it's closest to Western society in terms of the architecture and people. But what exactly distinguishes a growing nation from a developed nation is the big question that now I have. Although many African nations are classified as undeveloped, the majority of them have some of the most natural and least carbon footprint resources. How Africa has some of the most finest and largest pieces of diamonds and gold in the world. Observe how these achievements are somehow swept under the rug and never considered while discussing African nations. Even though Africa has some of the same achievements, it's turned as a negative for Africa, while Italy is being hailed for accessible walking streets and distinctive architecture. African countries are labeled as being quote-unquote underdeveloped, for having the same, if not more, walkable streets and distinctive architecture. You can see how this problem of how Africa as a whole is underdeveloped is a result of racism, because despite articles and videos that demonstrate that Africa is not a monolith, that in fact that not every nation in the process of development is in the process of development without any accomplishments or resources, mainstream media still, till today, refuses to provide information about modern-day Africa development. A country that specifically suffers from these stereotypes as it being seen as an underdeveloped country from media is Nigeria. Nigeria is a West African country. It's known for rich culture and diversity. Despite this, Nigeria is often portrayed in the media as an undeveloped country, plagued to poverty, corruption, and conflict. This negative portrayal is not only unfair, but it also doesn't accurately reflect the reality of its country and people. One of the reasons why Nigeria is often portrayed as an undeveloped country is because it's low GDP per capita. Nigeria is the largest economy in the world, with a GDP more than 450 billion, but its GDP per capita is only 20,000. While it's relatively low compared to other countries, this is often used as a measure of a country's development. Now, previously I mentioned what does define an underdeveloped country. And this is one of the actual, reasons why Nigeria is portrayed as underdeveloped. It's GDP per capita. But why not go into the other factors? Because the only reason why their GDP per capita is only $20,000 is because they have a huge population and it's constantly growing and it just keeps going up. Another reason why Nigeria is portrayed as a undeveloped nation is because it's corruption. Nigeria is ranked one of the most corrupted countries in the world by Transparency International, and this is often highlighted in media all the time. However, it is important to take into fact that the corruption is not only unique to Nigeria, and that it is the problem that affects many countries around the world. U.S., for example, there have been researches about how the U.S. hides so much of their crime rate. It's unbelievable. There's sex trafficking, incredibly high. There's so many things there that are legal that they don't even count as, corruption. Let's say the KKK in America right now, it's actually still legal. But no one wants to take that into account, right? Because the U.S. it's the third world with the Gucci belt, technically. But, no one wants to admit that, right? The reason why Nigeria is led to have so much conflict is because of history of ethnic and religious tensions, and this has led to a lot of violence. However, it is important to recognize that Nigeria is a diverse country with 500 ethnic groups, and the vast majority of people live in peace and harmony. I believe that more often we should talk about Nigeria's long history and numerous traditions. The nation has a lengthy and intricate history, and it customs reflect its multicultural makeup. For instance, the Husu people are renowned for their elaborate and vibrant fabrics, while the Yoruba have long and legacy of storytelling. Nigeria as a whole is a nation with rich and lively culture and reflects its diversity and history. Nigeria's culture is a significant component of what distinguishes the nation, from its music and art to its cuisine and rituals. Nigeria has also advanced in several areas in the past decade since civil war. The nation is one of the top producers of oil in the world, and its economy is constantly expanding. However, Nigeria still faces issues including racial tensions and poverty. But does that mean that we have to constantly talk about that? No. The U.S. is constantly, and I mean constantly, facing problems, poverty, religious tension. But we don't always just talk about that, right? We always talk about its football and its diversity. But how come we cannot do the same for African countries, specifically in Nigeria? This isn't to dismiss anything that's going on in Nigeria or Africa as a whole, like how we should ignore the poverty and the sickness, but it's unfair to portray Nigeria as a underdeveloped country. But the country faces challenges. It's a diverse and dynamic country that is making progress in many areas. The media should be more balanced in its reporting, its highlighting positive aspects of the country as well as its challenges. By doing it, it can also promote more accurate understanding of Nigeria and its people. Africa as a region wrecked by conflict reinforces the idea that the continent is unstable and dangerous, and it reinforces the negative stereotypes about Africa and its people. But you see, conflict happens everywhere. And just because there's conflict does not mean that we have to dismiss any country beautiful culture and history. And I think we shouldn't cancel it out. So I hope you can take from this podcast that, or anyone that listens to this, that Africa is always constantly succeeding. Doesn't mean that we have to dismiss the conflict. It just means that we need to talk about its history more. Thank you so much for listening. This is the podcast about how media still portrays Africa as an undeveloped nation. Thank you for listening.